John, welcome Amy, and welcome everyone else. Uh, we do have a full agenda today, so we missed our August meeting, so we'd like to move along with what we have here in September. So with that in mind, any changes to our agenda? I'll call your attention to the fact that we have a consent agenda, but would anybody like to make motions, additions, deletions, or changes to our agenda? Hearing or seeing none, I'm going to move on to item 2. This is now open to public comment for any items that are not on our agenda today. If any members of the public present who would like to comment? Hearing and seeing none, we're going to move on for staff introductions. We have Cy, Chris, and Jason. Can I go in the order that we have them in the agenda? Cy, are you ready?
Yeah.
Willing and able? Then
sure. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Sai Sarapalli, Senior Transportation Planning Engineer and Professional Engineer. I've been working at CCRPC for the last 11 years now. Before moving to Vermont, I was working in Idaho as a design engineer, and I was working for a consultant company. They were like county and city engineers. So I have some design background and transportation planning background from Idaho. I did my master's degree from University of Idaho in transportation engineering. So at CCRPC, my main responsibilities are I manage the technical assistance program. I attend to the safety and speed studies, safety and traffic calming studies at the municipal requests, upon municipal requests. I also manage scoping studies and assist other project managers on other projects, including stormwater management projects. I also work with Chris, Jason, and other transportation staff on corridor studies and other studies. I also manage the regional intelligent transportation systems program, which involves a modern technology in transportation system, including smart signals. So we do evaluation of existing municipal managed traffic signals upon request, and we come up with some recommendations for municipalities for future plans, like implementation plans. I also I'm serving as a local project manager for local sidewalk design and construction projects for a couple of municipalities, Shelburne and Jericho. So I oversee those projects for municipalities. And also I work on some traffic modeling projects, some micro simulation models. There's a lot of things.
That sounds pretty complete. So, Sai, I'm going to let other folks come up with a question, but I had 2 or 3 on my own immediately. Number one, how long have you been with us, and what town do you live in? Hopefully in the county.
Sorry. I've been with RPC for 11 years, with the CCRP 11 years, and I live in South Burlington. I live with my wife and 2 sons, 13 years old and 6 years old. They both are at soccer game now.
There you go. Wednesday night soccer.
Well, Wednesday night soccer,
Ours go on Monday. And so second question I might have would be a specific example, and I think you mentioned Shelburne with the sidewalks. Are they trying to fill in gaps there? How does that work briefly?
So Shelburne received a bike ped grant in 2019 to fill in a gap on Irish Hill Road. And also to install a prefabricated pedestrian bridge on the Laplite River on Irish Hill Road. So it's pretty much the final design is done. We also have federal funding obligated for this project, so it's pretty much ready to go for bid.
Well, great. And I think the bridges are very important in this day and age,
Yeah,
as we can see from Richmond and Bard's experience. And I'm going to get to you in a minute, Bard. One last question for you, Sai.
yeah.
Intelligent traffic, can you give us a
Transportation system. Yeah, intelligent
transportation?
transportation
Thank you.
system. Yeah,
Uh,
ITS.
can you give us maybe something coming online that's exciting, or something about the present systems that excites you that we may or may not know about?
Yeah,
As far
sure.
as I see those cameras are
Yeah,
what we think are
there are a
cameras.
couple of projects happening in the region, especially on Shelburne Road, and one is on Dorset Street. So South Burlington has some earmark funding. They're upgrading signals on Dorset Street from Williston Road to Kennedy Drive. So they're putting in smart signals in on Dorset Street, which is like more they detect vehicles, and they can provide efficient signal timing plans. So yeah, they are coming with like new controllers on Dorset Street, and I think VTrans is also working on Shelburne Road signal project. Yeah, those are the two projects that I'm very interested in, because I live in Burlington, and those two are really congested
So
corridors.
it's always nice to see it at home. I'm going to give way to Bard, and if anybody else had a question for Cy, please put your hand up, and I will get you the next.
I know this is a question that could lead to a long answer, but I'll ask you to keep it short, sort of about traffic studies. So this probably of greater interest to the small or more rural towns than the larger towns and cities. But whenever we bring up the idea of traffic study, people want to go from 50 to 25, and you go, well, that's probably not going to happen. You know, and your micro simulation traffic study, maybe briefly describe like what are the issues in traffic studies and what that term means.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, traffic signal like micro simulation model. The model shows like what is the level of service and what's the congestion, what are the queue lengths before and after scenarios. So yeah, we do when we run those models, it does help us to come up with recommendations for improvements. Any more questions for me?
Any more questions for Cy? If not, I'll move on for Chris. Thank you,
Thank
Cy.
you. Thank
Appreciate
you.
it.
Yeah.
And help me with the pronunciation of your last name, Chris. And by the way, to keep me from asking questions, let us know how long you've been with CCRPC, and hopefully what town you live in the county.
Totally. Thanks, Chris. Yeah, my name is Chris Dubin. I'm a senior transportation planner here. I graduated from UVM back in 2008, hopped around looking for sort of a final landing place, and landed at the CCRPC in 2012. So I've passed my 10-year mark here for sure. My main areas of focus here are kind of in the worlds of GIS and data management, data collection within transportation and water quality specifically. During the summer months, the main focus is managing our team of interns, which I'm sure a lot of you have seen or heard about, which do a boatload of data collection for municipalities. For various reasons, traffic counts, municipal asset condition assessments, road erosion inventories for MRGP compliance. It's quite a list, and it's really fun to work locally with municipalities, really just to serve their needs within that summer or that kind of current year. I also manage a variety of water quality planning projects year to year through the UPWP program. They range from video condition assessments to stormwater infrastructure asset management planning. But generally, I'm here to kind of provide really good quality data products to towns within these areas of focus, especially in the form of mapped data, GIS data specifically. And the goal is really to hope that drives better, strategic decision making at a local level.
You enjoy all the GPS, GIS information and mapping that goes with that.
Yeah.
Could you unpack that acronym MRGP?
Yeah, sure. The municipal roads general permit is a stormwater water quality permit that went into effect in 2018. It's a 20-year permit that is looking to look at local roadways that are sort of in close proximity to waterways of our state, and kind of evaluate their potential for transporting sediment into our waterways. There's kind of a set of stormwater standards that are, should be met for those roadways. Our team of interns, myself, are headed out every summer to evaluate some or all of these sections of road in a given town, and kind of get that big data lift up to the state on behalf of municipalities. And the fun part is we get to often kind of work with municipalities to tell the story of that data and kind of dig in and really help better, again, drive decision making.
Outstanding. Does anyone else have a question for Chris, who I'm going to, label as our youth focus group coordinator for about, what, 3 to 6 months of the year?
You got it.
Very good. And anyone else have a question? Raise your hand or speak up. Well, thank you, Chris. And I'll move on to Jason Charest. Jason.
Thanks, Chris. Hi, everyone. I'm Jason Charest, Senior Transportation Planning Engineer here at the CCRPC. I started here in 2007, so it's about a little over 16 years now. Resume is pretty short. This has been my one employer, so you can take that in. I graduated from St. Michael's College and the University of Vermont. I have dual bachelor's degrees, no master's, 2 bachelor's degrees, liberal arts from St. Mike's, civil engineering from UVM. And let's see, I live in Burlington. I have a 2nd grader who's also at soccer practice tonight. Met my wife at St. Mike's, liked it here, decided to stick around. I'm actually originally from the Manchester, New Hampshire area, in case anyone's interested in that. And currently, I've worn a lot of hats, fulfilled a lot of different roles at the CCRPC over my tenure here. Focus mostly on managing a host of projects in our work program every year. Like Cy being one of the engineers on staff. Focus mainly in the technical realm of things, corridor scoping studies, any sort of feasibility studies, assist Cy with speed studies on occasion, traffic simulation modeling, that sort of thing. In my free time outside of work, I like to snowboard, mountain bike, I still play soccer. I'm not sure how much longer I'm going to be able to do that, but I'm thankful for every day I'm able to run around out there. I know my time is getting tight on that one. I'm sure my knees will give out at some point. But until that day, still going. And yeah, that's a kind of a brief introduction there, and happy to take any questions.
Well, thank you. I'll ask you another one. If you could tell us a project that's occupying a lot of your time right now, or just give us a flavor and example of something that would be on your plate.
Well, right now, I tend to work a lot in Richmond right now. I thought you might like that part. Just wrapping up a study that I've dubbed the US 2 pinch points. So as a result of the paving in Richmond on Route 2, there were still maybe, I don't know, I think 13 points along US 2 that VTrans was unable to achieve a full 5 feet of shoulders on either side of the roadway. So we had a small technical assistance study with Stantec that we did to evaluate those and showcase any, outline what they needed to do to achieve those widths. So just a kind of a high level order of magnitude cost estimates there. But soon to be kicked off is a corridor study on Cochrane Road in Richmond. It's a very active corridor by multimodal users, a lot of cyclists, a lot of runners, but it's also a very popular transportation route for people and vehicles. So there's a lot of conflicts, as you might imagine, along there. So it should be a pretty spicy one. Looking forward to it. I know that the town is very much in tune with a lot of fun.
Absolutely. I think if we want to encourage alternate forms of transportation, biking being one, that would be key on it. Let's hear from Bart.
So I was just going to observe, if anybody was looking for a perverse silver lining to the recent flooding, it would be for us the reduced recreational pressure on Cochrane Road and use of the river. So for those who don't pay attention to the condition of the Winooski River, getting in the river would have been contraindicated for the last 6 weeks or so. And it really has substantially changed traffic. But to Jason's point, it's got all these things going on this one road, which seems like not a big deal compared to, you know, our diamond interchanges and stuff, but for a small town it becomes kind of a big deal, and the conflict between the commuters, the residents, and the recreationists is just an intriguing thing to watch.
Thank you. Benjamin. You'll need to unmute, Benjamin.
No, I'm sorry. I was waiting actually for a spot just to let you know that I'm here. I'm sorry if I was 2 minutes late in signing in, but yeah, I'm sorry.
And let's hear from Catherine. Catherine.
This has to go with the idea of, multimodal pathways that we were talking about, like Cochrane Road. Well, we have a very busy road in obviously with Skunk Hollow, and parts of it were just recently paved, but the company who put the fog lines on did double fog lines, extra wide, and boy, have the bicyclists complained like crazy, because it took away whatever little space they had on the side of Skunk Hollow. Plus, as we've been told, that the paint is very, very slippery when wet. So is this anything that can be changed over time? Or because we have people that said they'd like to go and scrape it off. But how do you, the question is then how do municipalities on these busy roads help it become at least have the bicyclists feel a little safer on the roads, because it's not exactly a large road.
Jason, I think
Great.
that's for you, huh?
Yeah, happy to field that. Generally speaking, that delves into the realm of traffic calming, and I'm very familiar with the history of Skunk Hollow Road, having conducted some of the earlier analyses before that middle section wasn't paved. And I think, y'all have done a pretty good job with it, installing the speed tables that you have along it. I think the nearby residents in Richmond actually really like those, and I think cited those as something that they'd like to see on Cochrane Road. And so it just, traffic calming is really a toolbox, and it's kind of there's no one silver bullet. It's kind of an assembly of different pieces to try to make it fit for the context of the roadway. And you do the best you can to slow cars, to encourage them to feel like they should go slower, kind of introduce some sort of friction in the roadway, whether it be vertical or horizontal changes, so that it just feels uncomfortable to go fast. That's generally speaking the goal behind traffic calming.
And it seems counterintuitive. I would think that widening the road has been something bicyclists have been asking for, but would probably encourage the cars to go faster. Sorry, Catherine.
Absolutely. I was going to say, to go along with that, does putting up share the road signs or painting make much of a difference on a road like Skunk Hollow?
I think it's a good reminder for people who are going to pay attention to signs and read them. I don't think it hurts. How much it helps is a very difficult thing to quantify, but I don't think it's a bad idea, so long as it's not to the point where you are cluttering your roadway with signage to the point where it's just, distracting and difficult for a driver to take in.
Thank you.
Does anyone else have a question for Jason? Absent that, I'm going to defer to Mike O'Brien for a moment. Mike?
want to take a minute to introduce our Mayor, Christine Lott, is here with us tonight. She's recently appointed our alternate, so you'll be seeing her from time to time. Christine, I don't know if you want to jump in and kind of introduce yourself.
Sure, thank you. Some of you I know, some of you I do not. I have been serving as Mayor of Winooski for 5 years now, working closely with Mike through our Planning Commission and CCRPC and with various other staffers there. I am excited to take on the alternate to support Mike in representing Winooski and ensure that there's close coordination between city leadership and the work of this regional body.
Well, thank you and welcome. We very much appreciated meeting you in person at the McQuam gathering that we had back in June, which was fabulous. Thank you again, Charlie and staff. You guys put together what I thought was a premier event. Welcome. And we look forward to your bridge project, and hopefully things will go smoothly.
Don't forget Main Street.
Oh, gosh. I like the old concrete slabs. I don't know. Well, anyhow, let's move on to item number 4, which is the action on the consent agenda. We do have a tip amendment. We do have a consent agenda. So I'll need a motion to recommend that the TAC approve the proposed tip amendment.
So moved.
Thank you, Andy. In a second.
This is Bart. I'll second.
Thank you, Bard. Let's vote on that, the consent agenda item. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Or raise your hand.
Aye.
Anyone opposed or abstaining, please speak up. Okay, that's the way this consent agenda item should move. Thank you. Let's look at item number 5, approving the minutes of July 19th meeting. We'll be looking for a motion to approve the minutes, perhaps with changes as noted. And will someone help us along? Is that you, Deidre?
Yes, I just have one question. Dana was at the last meeting. I was not, but I noticed that Charlotte is listed twice, once as Dana being present and once as absent. And in the voting, Charlotte also appears as absent. And I had an opportunity to check in with her this afternoon. She didn't tell me how she voted, but I wonder if there's an opportunity just to check in with her, maybe to correct that, because she believes she was at the meeting for the duration.
Okay.
Unless there's another explanation of why it appears that way, but
it only appears that way because sometimes you show up, and so I think we had 2 Charlotte reps on that list. So apologies, you weren't there. I didn't catch that. We'll fix that.
Okay, that's the only.
Okay, so it's a hiccup. So that would be a change. We're still looking for a motion to.
Also move.
Thank you, Catherine. And you're moving that with the changes, Catherine?
Oh, absolutely.
I'll second.
Thank you, Andrew. Anybody else have some changes that they need to note on the minutes?
There are a few changes that I noticed, and I will get those edited. Barbara Elliott's name is spelled wrong. We've left off a T. And then there's a couple of other small things that I noticed, and I will make sure that the ones that I noticed are corrected. Thank you. Anyone else have an eagle eye on anything that needed to be corrected?
You want to listen to all my mess then?
It may be duplicative, but if you don't mind, sure.
Well, I want to say that the minutes were very thorough and detailed, and so I noticed some of the stuff that had been already mentioned, but on other things there are either little changes, or can I rewrite the entire sentence kind of thing? But other people might have other ideas how to write the sentence, because some sentences were not needed more clarity and others were not finished.
Well, just call attention to which sentence and we'll see if Amy is already on it.
All right.
Catherine and I can work together on
Okay.
those edits.
Okay.
We did this previously.
Very good.
The only one that may need, of course, Amy might know this too, but there was a, let's see, we're talking about the SEDS. there was a timeline difference on that one, but again, I think Amy and I can work on that.
Okay, so are we making a motion then amended, Catherine, that we're going to have changes for clarification purposes only with Amy, in conjunction with Amy?
Well, let's see, which page had the, let's see, I had page 4, but I think that's just sentences. Yeah. Oh yeah, page 4 is actually a number that should be changed because but it may be something that Amy's found, but I don't know. It's line 23 on page 4, and it says, Christine said that 0.4% is the actual amount for the park and ride. I mean, that needs to be a different number rather than a percentage. And I, did not go back to notes or anything to find out what that number was.
Yeah, is Christine present? She was, I thought, a moment ago. All right, so we could get that number clarified?
Yeah, and then, okay, that's just a simple one. That's actually the other one we're going to change, which is language. Gosh, it's terrible when you pay attention to language like that.
Well, Charlie, in the interest of time, should we bring this back around for October's meeting? How's that?
Oh, I found it. Okay, the important, a technical number that should be changed. It says on page 9, line 5, it says between February 2023 and March 2023, the RPCs and RDCs, et cetera, implemented a public input driven planning process funded by, I think it was a lot longer than that, the start date on that, than just February.
More than just 2 months.
Yeah.
Okay. So we'll need clarification on that.
And that number, we'll review that number on the park and ride and that date for the SEDS. Catherine, but I will note, I think 0.4% may be correct about the percentage of the TIP that's for park and ride. So,
this was a specific one for Williston, how much it was going to cost or something like that.
Yep.
So it'd be better to have a number just because people reading that won't go, what 0.4% of what?
Yeah, it was a 0.4% of the 40 million that was in the previous sentence is going to park and rides.
Christine just weighed in on it. She said, we're talking about the percent of funding that went to park and rides.
There we go.
Yeah. And I just think, when somebody else is reading it, they might not know that.
Okay. I don't think the number's wrong. I think maybe we just need a few more words in the sentence to make the reference.
Exactly.
Okay. Gotcha. Thank you.
So that sounds like a wording presentation as well. The one you just mentioned on that date sounds a little more problematic to me. Is that correct, Charlie? That it's probably.
I'm not sure. Again, there may be a couple words missing that we did a public outreach for those couple months as opposed to the 2 years.
Right. Since this is so long,
it's not very clear at all.
All right. Can we defer this to next month's meeting and look at it again and reapproval? In the meantime, Catherine, you can work with Amy on this, and Charlie can get the basis for that number. I think that would avoid confusion. That'll keep us on track with a decent approval of minutes. Is that all right? Does that work?
Works for me.
And Andy, does that work with you? We'll withdraw the motion. Bart, go ahead.
Well, I'm just wrestling this. This is Bart as a point of order. So are we trying to clarify what people said, or are we as minutes documenting what was actually said? And I think it's the latter that we're obligated to do in minutes rather than correct any errors that were included. We could include maybe in parentheses as opposed to change what was said during the meeting, which would be properly noted in an accurate set of minutes. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense. Because typically these are not exact quotes. I mean, if it's an exact quote, but there were some things that you go, well, what's missing here? Yeah, in terms of so something needed to be added, or Yeah,
and we have the recording, so we can go back and, Bard, to your point, see what was actually said versus what our summary of what was said says. So, and I assume, Chris, that we're tabling this till next month.
I'm sorry, not withdrawing it. I am not quite up on that, but I do think if we just push it off to next month, we might be in better shape, if that's all right with all. Okay.
That's a motion that needs a motion to table it.
Okay, so then Will someone move to table this?
I move to table it.
Thank you,
Dan
Dan.
Karen.
Thank you, Dan.
This is
And-
Bart. I will second that.
Okay, or Michael.
Another point of order, do we need to withdraw the previous motion, which is still pending to approve the minutes?
No, tabling motion takes precedence.
Okay, thanks.
Okay.
Yeah.
So,
Thanks.
any further discussion? Then all those in favor say aye or raise your hand.
Aye.
I
And anyone opposed or abstaining, please speak up. Thank you.
So
Moving on
Brad's
to,
abstaining. Was anybody else besides Brad
Yep,
abstaining?
sorry, abstaining because I was absent at the meeting.
thank you, Brad. Okay, we're going to move on to item 6, board and committee appointments. You'll note on page 15 of your packet that per the bylaws, the regional board members are appointed by the Chittenden Regional Planning Commission for a term of 2 years for even numbered fiscal years at the June meeting. And that's all the municipalities that are present. At the same time, we have what are the terms for those other positions, Charlie? Special interest groups?
The regional, I'm sorry, I'm a little confused. I have 2 motions here.
Yeah.
Chris, the first one is to appoint the regional board members. And you see them listed. There is one person missing, and Austin, thank you for flagging that for me. Austin Davis should be listed as an alternate for the industrial business representatives. But yeah, so those are for the regional board members. Yeah, sorry, Chris, was there, did I answer your question?
Yes, because I've got the nomenclature a little off. As far as agriculture, socioeconomic housing, industrial business, and conservation and environmental, and that's the end of it. And they're termed regional board members, correct?
Exactly.
Okay. All right, because I had thought that there was a term like, commercial.
They get appointed for every 2 years for the even numbered years.
Okay. So we need a motion for that?
Yep.
Could I get someone to move to appoint these members? And who was the added individual?
Austin Davis.
As an alternate for industrial business?
I move we approve the regional alternate.
Thank you,
members.
Dan Karen. And a second? Thank you, Andy.
This is Michael. I'll second it.
All right.
Or Andy.
Or Michael Bissonette. Thank you.
Whatever.
Further discussion on these? All those in favor, please raise your hand or say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed or abstaining, please speak up. Okay. Thank you. And then part 2 is in my bailiwick, I believe. The chair shall, with the concurrence of the County Regional Planning Commission, establish and appoint committees and their members. So do we need a vote on this one, Charlie, or a motion on this one with the concurrence?
Or however you want to handle it. You at least need to declare your appointment, and as long as the rest of the board's okay.
With no objection.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah. I think other chairs have done it that way. Yeah.
Well, I like that. It gives me a feeling in my bones,
The power, go mad.
Yes, exactly. I mean, by fiat. So the only thing that would be missing would be more participation from some of our members. There are vacancies, as you can see, on the Long Range Planning Committee, which responsibilities are, perhaps you can dig into it a little more for me, Charlie.
That's really the committee that guides the development of the regional plan, or what we've called the ECOS plan. We are kind of, we spent a lot of time in that committee the last year or so, and are about to produce a draft in the next couple months. There probably is another phase of work that happens probably next summer, fall. But it only meets, kind of for a period of time every 5 years, typically. So it's not a regular meeting all the time, but when needed.
But it is an opportunity to add a chapter, subtract a chapter, or otherwise expand, the regional plan into something a bit different. Andy, go ahead.
Chris, you could add me to that one, Chris.
Okay, thank you. Appreciate that. We're going to have more chargers in Burlington, or we can expand to new areas. And then the other piece that we have is the Brownfields Advisory Committee, and we're looking for a member from the board on this committee as well. And can you give us a little background on that, Charlie?
Yeah, this you may remember a few months ago we announced that we got $500,000 grant from EPA to do brownfields assessments. So this committee guides what properties those assessment dollars are used on. Again, a little bit more of an ad hoc schedule, not a regular monthly meeting, but when we have properties ready and we have funding available, we bring those to this committee to review and approve.
So is there a volunteer to help us on the Brownsfield Advisory Committee, the ad hoc committee?
Yes, Andy Watts from Essex. I'd like to do that one.
Thank you. And we'll note Essex, Andy Watts, as opposed to thank you, Andy Watts, Williston, for being in the room. So,
Andy, sorry, I just want to mention that committee does mostly meet during the day. And I just wanted to mention that before you agreed to serve on that committee.
I went and looked at the webpage and noted the meeting time, so I'm fine with that. Good.
Okay, and Joe Segal, can we hear from you?
Hi, Chris. Yeah, I'm just for folks who don't know me, I'm taking over for Barbara Elliott from Huntington as the Huntington rep. And I'm interested in being on the Unified Planning Work Program Committee, if that's an option. It looks like there's 3 to 5 members, and looks like maybe there's 3 on it right now. Is now the time to ask to be put on that committee?
Now would be the time. I am sure Charlie would cast a blind eye if by fiat the board chair wanted to squeeze on a member from Huntington.
Yeah, no, that's good reading, Joe. Yeah, thanks. I should have probably had a blank line there showing there's an opportunity.
Well, good.
Thank you.
So my only other question would be on the Equity Advisory Committee. Are we full there, or are there any blanks there?
Yeah,
it was hard to.
You want to speak to that?
Yeah. So the meeting this month with the Equity Advisory Committee that's happening next week, I'm starting to do like an assessment of membership and hoping to recruit a few additional folks to continue to diversify that committee, but no additions at the moment.
Okay. It wasn't presented in the same format as the other committee, so I wasn't able to see if there was a blank line or not. So then with the board's tacit approval, I'm going to appoint establish and appoint these committees with their members as listed in the packet. For the Finance Committee, the Board Development Committee, for the Unified Planning Work Program Committee by adding Joe Segal. Is it Joe Segali or Segal?
That's right, yes.
Segali?
Yes.
Thank you. From Huntington to the UPWP program committee, and the Transportation Advisory Committee, the TAC interest group reps. There's the word I was looking for, interest groups. I called them special interest groups, Charlie, sorry, earlier with the regional planning members. And then the Planning Advisory Committee, the Long Range Planning Committee with the addition of Andy Montrall. Thank you, Andy. Clean Water Advisory Committee, and the Ad Hoc Brownfields Advisory Committee with the addition of Andy Watts of Essex Town. Thank you, Andy. Along with the Equity Advisory Committee as presently listed. If there are any objections or any further discussion, please speak up now. If not, we will move on to the equity update and Ann Nelson Stoner. Ann Nelson?
Yeah, thanks, Chris. I'm going to share my screen. All right, can you all see that? Okay, cool.
Looks good.
All right, great. Apologies to all of you in the room who have seen and heard this spiel multiple times at this point, but I'm going to run through most of it again. We've been working with staff and with the Equity Advisory Committee to develop an organizational equity statement over the past few months. CCRPC has a mission statement and we have a vision statement. Our mission statement is, as all mission statements, why do we exist? What is our purpose? Our vision statement, what are we working towards? For now, we're not touching those 2 statements because they require bylaw updates. We're not going to go through that process at the moment. So we're trying to add on an equity statement, which basically says who do we need to look out for and why. Following the equity statement will come a code of conduct. How do we need to behave along the way to live up to that equity statement? And an equity action plan. What does this work actually look like? So here's our kind of equity foundation workflow. Right now we're step 1, equity statement, the code of conduct will come, and then the equity action plan. And both of those are in the works right now. So the process for developing this statement, I started meeting with all CCRPC staff members in small groups, and we really workshopped this statement. We gathered a bunch of examples from elsewhere throughout the country, locally, had discussions around what we liked and didn't like about other statements, and came up with goals and priorities for our own statement. I then took that language to the Equity Advisory Committee. We workshopped it with them, and then consulted with a few community partners that I've been in touch with, brought it to the Executive Committee, back to CCRPC staff, back to the Equity Advisory Committee, back to the Executive Committee, and then now we're here at the board. So it's been in the works for quite some time. All right, I'm going to run through this background quickly. I know most of you have seen it before, but some of you haven't, and I think it's just important to ground ourselves in it before we actually think and talk about the equity statement. So why do we need an equity statement? We're not operating in a vacuum here. If we go way back, before there was the United States, there was slavery. We all know this. It's the basis of our economic and social order. There's a tendency to think we are far from this time in our history, and we really are not. Roughly $70 trillion was made off of free Black labor. If disparities in wealth were to continue at the current pace, it would take Black families 228 years to amass the wealth that white families now have. 2022 marks the first year that the United States will have been independent for as long as slavery lasted, and no current day adult will be alive in the year in which African Americans as a group will have been free for as long as they've been enslaved. It won't come until the year 2111. So planning has been used throughout our history as a central tool of the government at the federal, state, and local levels to perpetuate racial inequalities and inequalities in many different areas. Here's a list. This list could go on of just examples of ways that planning has been involved or tangentially involved in these practices. Vermont is no exception. Moving here from Virginia, it's a common kind of sentiment up here that Vermont is this progressive space, and it is, and there's a lot of wonderful things about it, but it's interesting that even back in 1831, Alexis de Tocqueville, who's a French explorer, wrote a book called Democracy in America. He traveled throughout the states and kind of commented on social life here. And he has this quote that says, "The prejudice of race appears to be stronger in the states that have abolished slavery than in those where it still exists. And nowhere is it so intolerable as in those states where servitude has never been known. The Negro is free, but he can share neither the rights, nor the pleasures, nor the labor, nor the afflictions, nor the tomb of him whose equal he has been declared to be. And he cannot meet him upon fair terms in life or death." Vermont's planning history. I've been trying to dig since I started here last year to gather history of planning in Vermont. It is surprisingly difficult to find, but some examples that I think we're all also aware of we're operating on unceded territory. We've had state-sanctioned eugenics here. We've had exclusionary housing covenants, urban renewal in our own form, and poor quality public housing, exclusionary single-family zoning, highway construction that has gone through neighborhoods, environmental and climate injustices. Okay, jump ahead. Where are we today? There was a blog post that was posted, I think it was in August, of an anonymous author who is moving away from Vermont, a Black Vermonter, moving back down south. And they wrote this reflection on why. So I just wanted to pull this quote. "Mississippi's racism is the kind that will look you in your face and say, yes, I'm a racist. Racism in Vermont is death by 1,000 pinpricks. When you start with a population that can at least acknowledge the presence of racism, it pushes the fight for equity 20 steps forward past the point of denial. How can we gain support to stop oppression from a population that won't even say it exists? This photo below came from Cambridge, Vermont. If anybody's interested in that blog post, I can pop a link in the chat. Okay, our population is changing. Over the past 10 years, our population's grown by roughly 12,000 people. Over 99% of those are people of color. If this trend continues, we'll have nearly 60,000 new people of color in Chittenden County by 2070. Income equality, we've seen almost no change since the civil rights days. The wealth disparity has only gotten wider. Income inequality has been rising since the 70s. 86% of Black and African American households rent in Chittenden County, while 65% of white households own homes. Again, just Black-white home ownership gap since 2010 is getting wider. Our homelessness rates are almost the worst in the country. We have among the lowest vacancy rate. Over half of Chittenden County renters pay over 1/3 of their income on housing. This was new to me. Vermont has the largest median home lot size in the US. And climate change. This summer really showed climate change's face here in Vermont. Obviously, these disasters are not going to impact everybody the same. Housing, more affordable housing tends to get put in more vulnerable land. We saw this already. Okay, so it just all begs the question of who are we planning for a future-oriented organization that needs to be planning for all of our communities and everybody involved in those communities. So components of the statement, staff members, these kind of 4 priorities really came from CCRPC staff of like, 1, it's really important that we acknowledge the problem. It's important that we recognize our own role and responsibility, our commitment moving forward, and state our goal. So the statement, and thanks, Chris, I think this was your suggestion in the executive committee meeting of organizing it this way, but I'm going to read through it. I've organized it in these kind of 4 categories per se. CCRPC acknowledges that structural oppression contributes to persistent disparities and condemns racism and discrimination in all its forms. As a governmental planning organization with decision-making influence, the work of CCRPC significantly impacts people throughout Chittenden County. We hold ourselves responsible for identifying and addressing historic and current inequities in our own practices, as well as those of the planning field as a whole. We commit to constantly evaluating our work to transform our actions, policies, and procedures through continuous education, leveraging assets to improve access, and meaningful collaboration with those most impacted by the problems we seek to address. In doing so, we hope to co-create a community where identity and socioeconomic status no longer influence life outcomes, and where all, not the select few, are heard, seen, belong, and treated as experts in their own experience. Okay. Here it is, kind of not divided up by those sections. And then I'm going to stop sharing my screen. I'm happy to pop this in the chat. And I also have some slides over that summarize feedback from the different groups that were involved in this process, if that's of interest or if that's where folks have questions. But I'm just going to open it up there and see if anybody has questions, and we'll go from there.
Very good. Thank you, Nelson. Anyone would like to weigh in on the 4 items of our equity statement? Our task in front of us is to approve and adopt this statement. We in the executive committee did have a peek at it, as Ann Nelson references. We kicked it back to the equity advisory committee to refine that language, similarly to how Catherine was looking for some clarification on the minutes. And so we were trying to get more of that bullet point look at it so we can look at the 4 elements of the equity statement so that we're acknowledging we are recognizing our role in the responsibility, that we're making a commitment to move forward from where we're at, and here's our goal in the end. So I think to us, that's manageable. And as you can see, that's one step in what, and Nelson, a 3-step process, as you showed in the slides.
Never ending step process, honestly, Chris, but yeah, 3 steps.
Well,
To start.
I think you had the code of conduct next, and then remind me of my visual memory is failing me.
Yeah, the code of conduct and then the equity action plan. And that action plan is really taking the organizational equity assessment that the Creative Discourse did years ago and kind of filling in the gaps. It's really our plan moving forward. What does this work actually look like?
Great. So, and I see Deidre just asked for the slides to be shared in a way, I suppose, that we can collect them and download them on our own. Is that a method that you're going to give us a link for, or somehow we can?
Yeah, I'm happy to share them.
Super. And Bard.
Well, first, I think the other materials will be helpful. And as somebody who helped push Ann Nelson Stoner and the other group back into the wonderful world of wordsmithing, I want to thank her and the others for going back, because they're like, some of the changes are subtle, but I actually think this is a better product personally than came before. And even though I know it's probably tedious and at times challenging for folks to keep going around the circle. So thanks for that.
No, I appreciate everybody's input. It really does make it a better statement. So yeah, I much prefer people be nitpicky with feedback than have no feedback.
Are there any other thoughts for Ann Nelson before I ask for a motion on this? If not, we are looking to approve and adopt this as our equity statement for CCRPC.
All right. Love you. All right. Bye.
That probably was not a motion.
No, it sounded like an emotion.
Chris, I'll make a motion. Chris, I'll make a motion to approve.
Thank you, Mike O'Brien.
This is Bard. I'll second that.
I think Dan Karen beat you to the punch. Thank you, Dan. We appreciated your affection. Any further discussion on the matter? Okay, I'll ask all those in favor, please say aye or raise your hand.
Aye.
Aye.
And anyone opposing, please speak up, and or abstaining, please speak up. Well, thank you. And thank you, Ann Nelson. We are going to be working more, as I understand, as we move along, and there's more work to be done. Thank you. We're going to move
Thank
to
you all so much.
We're going to move to number 8, Economic Development District Memo of Understanding. Is this Taylor?
That'd be me, Chris. Thank you. So in your packet, you have a memo and you have a draft memorandum of understanding. The memo explains a bit about what we're asking you to approve tonight. And what we're asking you to approve is essentially to provide authorization for CCRPC to enter in an MOU to create an economic development district with our Regional Planning Commission and Regional Development Corporation partners in Addison, Rutland counties, in Central Vermont, mostly Washington County, and 3 municipalities in Orange County. So if you remember back when we approved the SEDS, we talked about what an economic development district is a little bit. An economic development district is essentially another governmental entity that exists all across this country, including the rest of Vermont is covered by an economic development district, except for these 4 counties and 2 down south that are in the application process, Wyndham and Bennington. They are a governmental unit that essentially is anyone can create, but they're recognized by EDA, the Economic Development Administration. And in the memo, I outline a couple of reasons why we may want to enter into an EDD with our SEDS partners. First off, there may be opportunities where that EDD, EDDs sometimes are can access non-competitive EDA funding. An example of that was the CARES Act funding that was issued at the beginning of the pandemic. Every EDD in the country received, I think it was about $400,000 to implement economic development planning related to COVID response. So we missed out on that a few years ago, but the other EDDs in the state were able to access that money. So if there are future opportunities to access similar non-competitive grants, we would be in the queue for that if we had an EDD. Secondly, it puts us in a more competitive position if any of our partners or any of our municipalities are seeking EDA grant funds. If they do it through the EDD itself, there are essential priority points to go for the EDD. Lastly, in having an EDD, the EDD is able to aggregate projects from across different parts of the state. That could be really beneficial to some of, or actually most of our municipalities here in Chittenden County. And that's because most of our municipalities are not competitive for EDA grants as it stands now because median household incomes are too high and unemployment rates are too low here in Chittenden County. And so we potentially could aggregate a project. I hate to pick on Shelburne, John, but we could aggregate a project potentially in Shelburne with a Berry City, which has economic indicators that are eligible, or a project potentially in a Rutland city. And so we see that as a benefit here in Chittenden County. We're going to create an EDD through an intergovernmental agreement. That's the MOU. The memo talks about a couple other ways that we could create an EDD. Those seem more complicated and more cumbersome. So we decided to go the simple route and just do the MOU for the time being. Any questions on the MOU itself?
Well, a question for you. If you, for instance, use Barry as an example, and certainly South Burlington would love to access money that might otherwise go to Barry, how is it prevented within this EDD that Barry might get priority over South Burlington, or Rutland operation might get priority? If no one's bidding, I suppose then it's worthwhile. But if there's a limited pot of money, and you get where I'm headed.
There's a limited pot of money nationally, kind of per EDA grant program. But the point I'm trying to make here, Chris, is as it stands now, Berry City is clearly going to be competitive for EDA. Most EDA grant programs, in South Burlington isn't going to be. I don't think signing this MOU changes anything in terms of competition between those two municipalities, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that's sort of where I'm getting at, is where's the determining factor between competing requests for those monies? Does Barry going to be looked at as a standalone versus part of the EDD, or is it all going to be looked at as an EDD issue? And then within the subset of EDD, they're going to say, well, Barry should get this specified, or is it up to the requester to push forward on that? Oh, I got it in first.
So
a time frame.
Okay. Chris, I'm seeing this more as if the EDD is aggregating projects from multiple municipalities, are you asking what the match would be, or what the competitive nature of that application would be?
It's way more general, and maybe not specific to what needs to be done with a memo of understanding. But I was worried that what's an advantage to South Burlington, for instance, is a disadvantage potentially for Rutland and or Barry. And I don't want to, see. I would hope that there's a mechanism, or there's a way within the federal EDA that they're making that determination, and it's not being done locally and two elbows from South Burlington crowd out for Rutland and Barry.
I certainly don't think that's the case. And I think, certainly in our case here with a Berry City or a Rutland City or even a Winooski, those municipalities have capacity limits and may not be able to apply at all for EDA grant funding as it stands now. And that's where creation of this EDD could be an advantage to those municipalities, if anything else.
Okay. All right. So that was my question. Anyone else have a question for Taylor? I'm sorry to go on it. Well, there you are. And you would have us approve the West Central Vermont Economic Development District Memorandum of Understanding and authorize the Executive Director and Charlie Baker to sign the MOU on behalf of us?
That is the motion.
All right. Will someone help make that motion?
Also move.
Thank you, Andy Watts from Williston.
This is Bard. I'll second.
Thank you, Bard from Richmond. And any further discussion on the memo of understanding for the West Central Vermont Economic Development District?
Hey, Chris.
Yes, sir.
This is probably not a very important question, but Taylor, just curious because it said that not all of Addison or Washington County were included. Is that because the towns that are excluded are in a different regional planning?
They are, yeah. There are 2 municipalities in Addison County that are part of Two Rivers Ottaquechee, and there's 1 municipality in Rutland County that's part of Two Rivers Ottaquechee Regional Commission.
Thank you.
Any further discussion? Then all those in favor, please say aye or raise your hand.
Aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposing or abstaining, please speak up. All right, thank you. Do we stick with you or we go to Charlie for number 10, or number 9, the ECOS plan update for the ECOS prosperity review?
You're sticking with me, Chris.
And
Well.
can I interject one quick thing? Amy, for the minutes, Amy just noted to me that she is abstaining from that last vote.
Amy Bell, thank you.
Amy Bell, yeah, thanks.
All right, do you guys see the full screen version of this and not presenter view?
Yes, we do.
Thank you. All right, so I'm here to provide an update on the 2024 ECOS plan and to review part of the 2024 ECOS plan review tonight, and that's the ECOS prosperity sections. So right out of the gate,
remind us that prosperity is what used to be economy.
I'll talk a bit about what is in prosperity here in a second, Chris. Yes.
Thanks.
I wanted to talk timeline first because we talked timeline back in July, and since that time, things have changed. There's a lot here on the screen, but in essence, we've determined that we need to delay the adoption process for the 2024 ECOS plan from spring 2024 until likely fall 2024 into winter 2025. There are really 3 main reasons behind delaying adoption. First off is that we feel like we need additional time to do specific outreach with underrepresented communities. We hope to work with Ann Nelson and to work with the Equity Advisory Committee to sculpt an engagement plan specific to reaching out to underrepresented communities this winter and this spring. And we hope to continue working with the Long Range Planning Committee to make edits to the plan next summer based on that outreach. The second reason is that as a part of the HOME Act this past year, the legislature required that the Agency of Commerce and Community Development develop regional housing targets as a part of the statewide housing needs assessment. Back in July, we thought that statewide housing needs assessment was going to happen in 2025. They've actually moved it up a year. And so now that statewide housing needs assessment is going to be done in March 2024. Before we had planned to adopt the plan in June 2024. That complicates adoption as it is. It also doesn't provide a lot of time to do the other thing we're supposed to do per the HOME Act, which is to take those regional housing targets and municipalize them, essentially set municipal targets to put in our regional plan. And so we plan now to work on the methodology of how we're going to municipalize with our Planning Advisory Committee this winter, and to be ready to municipalize our regional target this spring and into next summer, 2024, in order to move with adoption next fall. The third reason is that we anticipate statutory changes related to the future land use map in the ECOS plan. Charlie's going to talk more about that later, but we just felt like that was another really valid reason to delay adoption of the plan itself. And so now, this fall is really unchanged. We hope to work through the draft plan in really 4 sections: the introduction, and then ECOS prosperity, ECOS people, and ECOS place. We're going to work with the Long Range Planning Committee and the board. And then this spring and going into next summer, really address those 3 outstanding things that we want to work on, and then start adoption in October 2024. Any questions on timeline?
So to summarize, we're going to push out our self-imposed deadline of June of 2024. There's no penalty for not making June of 2024. It just happens to be the 6-year mark for our existing plan, correct?
Correct, Chris. Yeah,
We're going to push it out another 4 to 8 months for the convenience of all these other things that got tossed into the bin here at the last moment by the legislature during the last session.
Correct.
Okay, and
you know,
take advantage of that.
And just for everyone's own knowledge, our actual deadline, not our self-imposed deadline, our actual deadline when our plan will expire is not until June 2026. And so we still have some wiggle room on the back end of this in case we do need to delay again. I hope we don't have to. But that is our actual deadline in terms of expiration.
And the 3 pieces we're going to incorporate more outreach with our equity advisory committee. We're going to look at the real bone of contention, I suggest, which will be the housing targets per municipality. And then Charlie's going to fill us in on that last piece in the next item on the agenda, the regional land use future maps or future regional land use maps. Thank you. Anyone else with questions at this point? Go on.
All right, I know we have a lot of new board members, so I wanted to talk a bit about the structure of the plan. So the plan is going to be structured much like the current 2018 ECOS plan is structured. We have a main document, and in that main document, we have a vision, an introduction, some framing, some regional context. And then we have 16 goals, and then we have 10 strategies with actions under those strategies. And so what you'll be reviewing today are the goals and the strategies and actions for the ECOS people section, which again, we'll talk about what that means in a second. The plan is also composed of a bunch of supplements. There's one supplement on the actual planning process itself. There's one that's specific to the regional plan and our regional land use districts. There's the SEDS itself, which will incorporate as a supplement the Metropolitan Transportation Plan. Then lastly, the data component of our enhanced energy plan is also a supplement. Any questions on structures, on the structure of the plan?
Will the SEDS include the West Central Vermont Economic Development District discussion?
I think it'll probably just be the SEDS that we just adopted this past year without any amendment.
Okay, I'm just looking for maps so I can know who our partners are on that memo.
There's a map on that SEDS, Chris. I can get it to you.
Thanks.
So as I mentioned earlier, we're going to review the ECOS plan really in 3 different sections: prosperity, people, and place. And in prosperity, we have 7 different goals: economy, household finance, etc. I do want to note that you do not see infrastructure facilities in the drafts that we sent out with this packet. We're having some version control issues. You're going to see infrastructure and facilities when we review place in November. Just wanted to mention that out of the gate. Any questions on these themes, these sections, and how we're going to review the plan this fall? Okay. So in terms of the edits you're going to see to this document versus 2018, there's going to be data updates, particularly to the enhanced energy plan. We'll see that when we review ECOS Place in November. We've tried to at least address the topic of equity in terms of data in the key issue sections and having some specific actions related to equity. You'll see that mostly in the ECOS people section in October. We also wanted to address the LRPC and PAC comments on a prior draft that you guys did not see that we started way back in late 2021, early 2022. And the intent of today is really to just do a basic outline of the additions and deletions to the plan from 2018 and to provide an opportunity for the board to ask questions or provide comments on the draft language. And so now I'm just, you have in your memo kind of an overview of what's changed by goal and by strategy, but I'm going to do the same thing here in this PowerPoint presentation. And I'll go one by one. Please stop me if you have any comments, questions on any of these sections. I figured this was less tedious than going page by page. And so the economy goal, in the economy goal, we added a bunch of data from the SEDS related to the local economy. We also added information about labor force participation rate. And we looked at that in particularly by race. During the pandemic, there was quite a big difference actually in labor force participation in the state based on race, with labor force participation being much higher for the BIPOC community than for the white community. Could be a lot of reasons for that, but we felt it was worth noting. We also looked at average wage by municipality. Just wanted to show that jobs in municipalities and the wage you can get from those jobs varies pretty greatly by municipality in Chittenden County. Any questions on economy?
Taylor? That's
Yes,
Mike
ma'am.
O'Brien. Just a quick question. The data you're getting, where is it from, and what year is it from? How current is it?
Yeah, in the current draft, you're going to see a lot of probably 2021 ECS data. It's a 5-year survey most of the time. So that would be what, 2017 through 2021 ECS data. Census data, if it's applicable, from 2020. You're going to have information from the Bureau of Labor Statistics, Vermont Department of Labor, mostly from 2021, maybe some 2022 data when we can get it. The data, when we go to adopt this plan, Mike, we'll probably have to do another update next spring, just to make sure we have the latest and greatest before we head to adoption in fall 2024.
Yeah, I was concerned about that the last time. Always am concerned about how current the data is, because if we're doing a 2024 plan and we're using 2020 data or 2021 data, it's kind of old.
Yeah. Yeah, we'll update the data the best we can, next spring before we bring another draft back for review by the LRPC next summer, and then to the board for the adoption process.
Great, thanks.
So this is the first comment. Yeah, I will say all these data sources are much better at telling us where we were than where we are, much less where we're headed, right? So that's just a fact of life. My substantive question, though, is around household finance. We have data by race. Have you thought of other groups like disability? And I point that out because in my world, that's strikingly different. There are huge wage disparities among people with disability.
If you can get me a data source, Bart, I'd love to look at that. I'm just not sure I can get my hands on it.
Cornell.
Yeah. Cornell? Okay.
Yeah. And
is that by state or by county or?
Well, you have to look at margins of error because it has to do with sample sizes and stuff. But it does exist, even though it's got holes. It's much better statewide, so it's probably reasonable at county, especially for Chittenden County, as opposed to town level.
Happy to track that down, Bart.
And Nelson?
Yeah, I just want to jump in around the data conversation because we're also adding in the kind of upfront introduction section, there will be a subsection that helps frame data, because it is a big issue, just like what data we have access to and what we don't have access to, especially in a rural state like Vermont, and margins of error tend to be really large for marginalized communities. And even if the data were accurate and we were a more urban area, data like disability data tends to already be fairly inaccurate because the category is so porous in some ways. So anyways, that's all to say that this data conversation is a really tricky one, specifically in Vermont. And yeah, we're hoping to frame it a little bit more honestly in the report as well. I just wanted to add that.
Thank you, Ann Nelson. I think I just also want to note that introduction portion of the plan with that data conversation, we're going to bring to the board with Ecos Place in November. So you folks will see that first iteration of that introduction section this fall.
And then could you unpack the 2 bullet points under working lands there for me, Act 59 and regenerative economy?
Sure thing. So Act 59 refers to the law I passed. Charlie, correct me if I'm wrong, if this was last year or the legislative session before, but it deals with Vermont's new goal to conserve 30% of the state's land by 2030 and 50% of the state's land by 2050. And so just wanted to reference that act and the goals of that act and how ambitious that is in the ECOS plan.
And the median lot size doesn't automatically have conservative.
I mean, the median lot size is really big in Vermont, but heck, even the average lot size of Vermont, I think most land trusts won't be that interested in conserving because they want really big tracts. But how we reach that goal, Chris, is a pretty open question.
Well, can I jump in, Taylor? So that's an example of the data. If we're doing median lot size in Vermont versus median lot size in Chittenden, I think those are likely really different data values, right?
Yeah, and actually, I don't think we necessarily talk about lot size in the ECOS plan as it stands now, but I know we can get average lot size information from the VNRC forest fragmentation study, I believe. So yeah, we can get that data and include it if you'd like. In terms of regenerative go ahead.
So say we're actually including a section on parcelization in ECOS Place. So you'll see that in November.
In terms of, I'm glad Darren popped up. In terms of regenerative economy, Darren's going to have a much better explanation of that and much shorter than me. So I'm going to kick it over to Darren to talk about the regenerative economy.
Oh boy, with that kind of preface, now the pressure's on. Hi folks, Darren Shibler. So I helped write the section on regenerative economy. It's a fairly simple concept, but essentially, modern industrialized economies are fairly resource extractive. We mine something out of the earth, we process it into a product, we give it to people, and then at some point it goes into a landfill. That's the simple explanation of how things work today. What we are trying to get to is a more circular or regenerative economy where you take a resource, you use it, it goes back into the ecosystem somehow, and then you're able to sort of continue working with the resources you have, circulating them rather than using them and disposing them. That also refers to sort of the ecosystem of economics and how different parts of that support each other, more like a food web instead of a food chain. But the general idea is place our human society into the limited resource context that we live in reality on a finite planet.
Great. Thank you.
For the sake of time, I will not review the rest of the bullet points in the slide, but are there any other questions related to economy, household finance, or working lands? All right, I'll keep us moving. Goals in terms of scenic, recreational, historic resources, not much change there. We just updated some information related to the amount of bike and pedestrian infrastructure here in Chittenden County. Again, not much change in arts and culture. We cite the fantastic Create VT action plan. This was plan of the year in Vermont a few years ago. That plan is so great, we're just going to cite it and probably try to implement that plan as it is. In terms of education, we provided some information about different educational outcomes by race in terms of standardized test scores and long-range outcomes. We talked specifically about the child care bill that passed last legislative session and how that relates to child care costs. And then we also referenced the impact of COVID-19 on the teaching profession itself and teacher burnout. Any questions on those goals? All right, moving forward to the strategies and actions. This is where the rubber meets the road. What are we going to do to implement our plan over the next 8 years after we adopt it? The economic infrastructure strategy has actions that are pretty much just the SEDS or a summary of the SEDS. Where we've summarized is mostly around actions that are that in our SEDS, our regional development corporation partners are more likely to implement instead of the RPC. So we've summarized and shortened. In the ecological systems working lands strategy, we've just consolidated a very, very long action related to habitat preservation to be much more succinct. And then we also reference implementing working lands actions that are referenced in the SEDS and in the Farm to Plate strategic plan, another really great statewide plan that's much more detailed than we'll get into the SEDS, that is well written and well researched. Minor changes in the governance strategy. We moved some language related to housing and energy related financing to those respective other strategies. And so you'll see that language at a later meeting as a part of ECO's place. Any questions on changes to strategies and actions? All right. That's it in terms of the review of ECO's prosperity. And I know we have limited time here tonight. And so if any board members have reviewed that draft section of the plan, you have specific comments or specific text edits, if you wanted to go that detailed, please feel free to email me or even set up time to talk to me. I'm happy to do that. I want to provide two other quick updates on ECO's plan process. First off, just want to let folks know that we've selected a consultant to build a specific ECO's plan website. That consultant, we're not quite under contract yet, so I won't say their name, but they're very experienced, particularly in doing ArcGIS hub sites. And so sites where we can integrate a lot of mapping with text and make it much more interactive than the current site that we have. And I believe we hope to have essentially a draft plan on the web up by June 2024, if not earlier. Dates have changed a bit with the scope of work with the contractor, so that might be a little bit off. It might be a little earlier than June 2024. Also, just want to let the board know that we're going to contract with the same copy editor that we used for the MTP this past spring. Hope to start working with them on these varying sections of the ECO's plan this fall. Any questions on the website or copy editing? Excellent. That is what I have for you folks tonight on the ECO's plan.
Well, thank you.
Again, please let me know if you have any comments on the draft.
Great. We will look forward to it. And as we segue into item 10, the regional future land use concepts, it'll build on the third piece of your changes to our agenda, the timeline that we had. Charlie, are you covering that as well?
Yeah. So I mentioned this a little bit in previous meetings, but it's been a couple months since we met. Want to update you as to what's going on with the various studies that came out of S100, and then I'll kind of end that talking about potential changes to make our future land use maps more consistent with other RPCs statewide, and ask for your feedback on that. So just to ground us, there are 4 studies that are all kind of interrelated that came out of S100. Some of them, a couple of them started before that, but in terms of this legislation, but for our purposes, we'll just call them S100 studies. The first one is Act 250. So the Natural Resources Board is pursuing a study to look at, I think they called it necessary updates to Act 250, but really the legislature was asking the NRB to look at modernizing and updating Act 250 to be, and they specifically said to look at location-based jurisdiction issues. And so there's been a steering committee and different public meetings and focus groups have been going on around Act 250. And there is some pretty, I think, significant movement being discussed in that steering committee. And this has been, it's pretty consistent actually with our Act 250 policy from, God, I don't know what year, maybe 2016, 2015, like it's, 6 to 10 years old, that we spent some time trying to develop a policy on Act 250. And that basic approach to Act 250 was, we would like to see, and this was a position of the CCRPC board, the Act 250 relieve some of their jurisdiction over our areas where we're trying to encourage growth in exchange for increasing jurisdiction and regulation of more natural resource areas in the state. And this was really a reaction to the jurisdictional threshold being 10 lots or 10 units of housing triggers Act 250. And that was kind of my term, a little insidious, kind of encouraged 9-lot subdivisions all around the state to just be under the threshold. And so that's what happened since 1970. Our rate of rural subdivision, and apologies, this is no offense to anyone who lives in one of those houses. This is not a personal issue. It's just from a land use policy standpoint, it did encourage a lot of rural sprawl in Chittenden County. Our rate of rural subdivision almost doubled after Act 250 passed. So that there was kind of this bargain, and this bargain has been getting debated the last few years. Could we ease up in the places we want to encourage growth and tighten down in the rural resource areas? And this steering committee that's advising the NRB right now is talking about what they're calling a 3-tier approach. Tier 1 being the places they want to encourage growth. Let's maybe ease up, increase jurisdictional threshold, or maybe even eliminate Act 250 jurisdiction altogether in those places. At the other end of the spectrum is that Tier 3, is what they've been calling it, which are more important resource lands where they would increase jurisdiction. So it wouldn't necessarily be no-go zones, but it would, maybe instead of a 10-lot subdivision triggering Act 250, maybe it's 5 or 3 lots or something below 10, I think. There may be other things that they look at, elevation. They've been talking about a road rule, but it's really, how to get at the rural subdivision impacts on particularly kind of high quality forest lands, et cetera. And there is also more attention because of climate change and the greenhouse gas goals, looking at those forest lands with regard to sequestration, right? So anyway, that's a quick update on the Act 250 recommendations. Are kind of, so far they've been talking about these 3 tiers. I think they've got agreement at the steering committee on those 3 tiers. They're now starting to get the next level down of detail, and that's where it will get messy. So the second study is, maybe I should pause. Questions on the Act 250 study? Or issues that ought to be brought up there? Okay, I will take that as do good things. The second study is what's been getting referred to as a designation study. The Department of Housing and Community Development frankly, they asked the legislature, and the legislature asked them to re-examine the designations. For those of you not too familiar with the designations, you're probably familiar, you've heard downtown designations. In Chittenden County, we have the most designations, but we have downtowns, village centers, new town centers, growth centers, and the most recent one was neighborhood development areas. And there's kind of 2 flavors of those, I'll say. The downtowns and the village centers are really about those historic centers and tax credits and rehabbing historic buildings in those centers. That actually seems to be working fairly well. But the other 3 designations are a little bit more about where we want to have growth. And those kind of came in very hodgepodgey over the years. All 5 of those designations happened in the legislature and got added to statute over the last 20 years at different times. So it's not a coordinated package. It doesn't all work together well. But those last 3 are more the growth areas. And there seems to be some growing momentum in that study to collapse from 5, maybe down to 2 or 3 designations. And I think it's headed towards being able to designate larger areas for growth. And this is also coming as a response to the flooding that happened. We have a lot of, villages and, Montpelier, right? We saw the damage there. And I say larger areas for growth and tying it to the flooding damage, because part of the conversation in those places that are sustaining heavy flood damage along the rivers is, okay, we need to flood-proof some of those buildings, but maybe some of it we need to have housing growth outside of the floodplain. So we may need some more land as part of that growth area in that center. And there was a big workshop last Tuesday. Probably is 130 people, I think, down in Randolph talking about this. So I think that's also making good progress. And in a way, those growth areas that are getting talked about, the designations, I think are lining up pretty well with this idea of tier 1 in the NRB study. And then there's 2 more studies that the RPCs are responsible for. One of them is, I've been kind of thinking about it as a highest level of designation, but the legislature referred to it as delegation. And this really came up from Burlington, Winooski, South Burlington, saying, it's not just our growth areas that need to be excluded or exempted from Act 250. Like, our regulations are at such a level, Act 250 is not really adding any value. And so we should be like fully delegated or exempted for the whole municipality. I will say that there was some in the legislature that had some trouble with that, which is why I didn't get into statute right then. This was debated in the springtime, but it turned into a study. We're kind of working on the details of that right now. I'm doing a lot of the facilitation for that. And I think it's going to turn into more of, let's give the opportunity for a municipality, if they want to have their full municipality not have Act 250 be a second layer of regulation, let's allow for a process where they maybe can negotiate with the NRB on a delegation agreement, which is actually a process that exists for other purposes like shoreland protection, building codes, fire codes, where municipalities have agreements with the state agency of how they're going to accomplish kind of the same purpose, maybe not exactly the same way the state would, but it allows the state agency to have a negotiation. And even sometimes the state says, well, we'll hold on to this one part, you do the rest. So it may be something like that for Act 250. Sorry, that's a really complex topic, but any questions?
Can we summarize that in effect? I think you talked about the Act 250 with the tier 1 towns, tier 2 and tier 3 categorization.
Not towns.
Well, I'm sorry, I misspoke, but
yeah,
areas.
Areas, yep.
Because these are fuzzy maps still as future land use maps, correct? They're not going to be delineated with on the ground markings or anything of that sort.
You are a disciple of Paul Connor, I can tell as soon as you said fuzzy maps. Paul is the preeminent disciple of fuzzy maps, but no, these will be delineations. They will have lines on them.
Okay, and of course that's where everybody gets excited when we see a map and I'm on the other side of the line, or even if it's fuzzy yellow and I want to be fuzzy green, that's when you get all your public comments. Yep. But then the second piece you just referred to, I believe, is the delegation for municipalities that would have their acts together as far as planning and zoning is concerned, and Act 250 is an overreach. Is that how it feels?
That's actually the third piece I talked about, and there was designations as the second piece. Okay. The third piece would be, Chris, the entire municipality, like your regulations and enforcement are so good, you don't need Act 250 anymore. Yeah.
Okay. And then the designations, just recap that for me. I must have blitzed out.
Yeah, that's right. The designations are probably consolidating those 5 designations that exist now into what it looks to me like growth areas, and then the downtown historic village tax credit centers. So kind of tax credit incentives and then growth area incentives. So that's where that's going. And then I do want to get to the 4th study, but Joe has a question.
Yep.
Yeah, Charlie, I was wondering on particularly the village center designation. Huntington has 2 of those. They're really small.
Yep.
And there's not really much room for any sort of growth in them. And we've done a lot of work and just passed new regulations last year to, make our village centers a little bit bigger and to allow for more density. And Is there any, I mean, if the purpose is just tax credits, maybe it's not really the right fit for us, I guess, but is there any, any push or consideration of making those sorts of centers bigger? Because they're really small. When you look at maps around the state of all these village centers, to where even the concentrated mixed use growth is around these communities, the designated centers are just really small.
It is. Yeah. And so for the rest of you, and that actually has been coming up for municipalities as one of the issues around the village center designation is the state has been working with the town and drawing really precise lines just around the commercial properties in your village center. And, sometimes they're like, oh, that one's 3 properties away, so we're not going to include it. It's been kind of, I think even the state would say kind of a torturous process that I think, frankly, the state would like to get out of. And Joe, if I can, I'm going to segue to the 4th study because I think we are trying to wrestle down with that issue. Or John, something quick?
Yeah, I was wondering, you were talking about the flood. I'm pretty much on Act 250, but I have not been involved in any, even reading things about what's gone on since the flood. But a lot of our villages are in floodplains, and to designate growth outside them means you're going to sprawl. Act 250 is one of its main things is to prevent sprawl. I see complete conflict here. Is there been any chat about that?
That really is the issue, John. I think we're working on the labeling. It may be, it's not sprawl if it's planned growth, right, adjacent to your center. So it's let's say the land area right upstream of or not upstream, sorry, uphill. I'll pick on Richmond just because Bard's on my screen right there, and has had some flooding impacts right in your village. But there is upland area that's outside the floodplain that's pretty adjacent to the village. That could be an area for housing growth in the village. But it would be a larger village area than maybe what is designated now for sure. So, John, I think we're going to have to kind of work our way through, what's the growth area in there that's not traditional sprawl, which might happen like without infrastructure and just, into the rural lands, but more planned growth adjacent to our communities. If that makes sense.
This is Barb. I'd make one comment that some of the development we have that was built just 20, 30 years ago could not be built today because it's in the floodplain.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I think there's going to be a lot of conversation. Sorry to go on this tangent, but there's going to be a lot of conversation in this legislative session about how to best regulate what happens in the floodplains and river corridors. I think there's some concerns, even 20 years ago, might have been floodplain regulations, or even more recently, and not all towns maybe are administering them equally. Not as much of an issue in Chittenden County, but around the state. So anyway, that is an issue though, John and Bard, like, how to appropriately plan and regulate these areas while also addressing our housing crisis, right?
Right.
This is kind of a lot of how this got started was we need to identify ways to plan for and support the building of more housing in hopefully appropriate places, right? Out of floodplains, adjacent to our villages. So those are competing things depending on exactly where you are.
Charlie, I have no doubt you are smart enough to know all of this, and you're doing a very good job of telling us that. Just a quick question: Are all those under the dome understanding who are involved in this on what a historic tussle that is going to become?
Yeah, and I think everybody is kind of like dealing with, let's have both things be true, right? Like, let's figure out how to safely build more housing, and let's figure out how to keep people out of harm's way, in those river corridors and floodplains.
And not consider it sprawl.
Right, exactly. So political commentary, I will say, VNRC does seem to be on board with this this grand bargain, right? Like, let's ease up on these growth areas in exchange for more protection in the rural resource areas.
Okay. All right. Fair enough. I was just
now
curious.
that's only in concept, right? So and at both ends of the spectrum, there's going to be debates, right? Like, they may want the resource area to be bigger than property owners or the state at large is comfortable with, and they being VNRC may want the growth areas to be smaller than what the RPCs or municipalities perceive is an appropriate growth area for their town.
Okay.
That is, we're going to work that out in the coming weeks, John.
Yeah.
Before the session, I'm quite confident.
Fair enough. I just my brain couldn't help but ask that question. Sorry.
No.
About
It's really fair, and it is the crux of the debate that needs to get resolved before the end of the session. The fourth study is really at the RPC, trying to update these future land use maps. This is a handy dandy. I'm doing my Vanna White thing back here. This is our future land use map now. The RPCs, all 11 of us are having conversations about how to use a consistent terminology and criteria for future land use maps. Because the state would like to base more policy decisions, whether it's Act 250 exemptions or designations, on mapping that is, and I think I've had peers use this, municipally driven, regionally reviewed and approved, and maybe state reviewed at some level. And I credit to Darren and Sarah on our staff, but we kind of looked at what all the other RPCs were doing, kind of tried to look for consistencies, and a couple weeks ago we were down to 9 land use areas. Tonight I just got it down to 6. That may work, but kind of just to review those real quickly with you. And this is what I would appreciate, any specific feedback or questions if you have them. One is the planned growth areas. And for our region, it is, most of this, or maybe all of this urban area, like what we've been calling center, metro, enterprise, suburban. But fundamentally, it's where we have planning or zoning, water, and sewer has been kind of the basic criteria we've been looking at statewide. Like, those are our growth areas. If you have infrastructure and zoning, you're probably at least fairly prepared for growth, depending on infrastructure capacity. Bart, already, question.
Well, I'm just going to make a comment that we are sort of a little social laboratory case study in that wherever there's water and sewer, the open land is floodplain. And where there's open, potentially developable land, there's no water sewer. And literally the cost of getting water sewer out there is like $1 million. Yeah. Which doesn't sound like much until you try to find somebody to pay for it. And nobody wants to pay for it. The current users are not going to pay for it. The new users can't afford it. And so that's where I think this infrastructure question, if we're going to dislocate, if you will, village development, it strikes me for some of the small towns, like, we got 400 odd customers on our water sewer. Yeah, but you can't do a TIF district because it's not part of the village because it doesn't have water and sewer. And then if you do it, then you have to get agreement of the landowners of what they want to do. It's tortured. And some of these vehicles sound great if you're a town with a bunch of staff infrastructure. We got a handful of staff and a select board. I'm just going to observe, for small towns, they're not taking on these long-term complex projects that require a lot of time and in many cases a lot of money. That's kind of the obstacle I see for the sort of fringe towns, if you will, like Huntington, Richmond, Bolton.
Yeah, no, it's not. You're not fringe towns. You're normal Vermont towns. Maybe in the center areas, that's the fringe part. But Bart, you put your finger right on I think the issue amongst my peers is there needs to be more work on water and sewer infrastructure, funding, financing, whatever it is, if this is going to really be widely useful. So that is an issue, and actually I want to move to the second land use area that have been talking about is just the village centers. And Joe, I think, Huntington is in this boat, right? Like, you don't have water and sewer yet, but it's kind of, you're in the planning, and, not clear to me, and maybe Barbie, Richmond Village is in this area too. Like, yeah, you have water and sewer, but maybe you're not really ready to be a growth area because you can't get the extensions or you can't get the infrastructure financed. So we are going to leave like just a village center. Like, if you don't want to have growth and you just want to have those historic tax credits and all those other types of rehab investments in your village center, that would be the second type of area. And then the third area, I'm not sure this is what the end result will be, we were calling transition. And those are areas, and Barb, maybe this is kind of like that $1 million thing, like, hey, we have an area here we would like to grow into, but we're going to need some help, private and public funding probably to get there. And so, then there'll be questions. And really, we're trying to make a point of like, this is where state infrastructure dollars need to go into these three areas: our growth areas, our village centers, and these transition areas that, may be added to our growth areas. And then, so growth areas, we have a couple special areas. We were calling a resource-based, maybe I should scroll in the document so I don't get this wrong.
Resource-based
recreation area. Thanks, Joe. And so those it was first called resort areas, but resource-based, but it's kind of the ski areas and maybe some other areas that, might pop up if there's, who knows, a lake side resort or something like that. But those are ski areas, just as a different type of land use that will probably, I expect, will stay under Act 250 jurisdiction. Fifth area, just called enterprise, kind of noting that there are these industrial parks that are kind of separate from villages and growth areas in lots of places, not so much in Chittenden County, but other parts of the state. And then finally, hamlets, kind of noting like we have little crossroads, they don't have infrastructure, they may not even have zoning, but just to note them probably more as points on the map. And this is probably 8 of the RPCs use that right now. And then finally, rural, with kind of noting, which is kind of what we do, all that area, 85% of our county is rural, but there's a whole bunch of different things in that rural area, right? There's kind of rural residential, there's working farms and forests, and then there are kind of permanently protected resource areas, whether they have, easement, conservation easements, or it's actually in public ownership. So that rural is, well, yeah, it's what it is, most of the state. So anyway, that's, yeah, any other feedback and thoughts as we talk about this? I know Austin has a lot of thoughts.
Charlie, I was wondering, just back to the designation, state designation program, how do those areas, some of those growth areas and the village areas line up with what's going on in that process?
Yeah, the conversation between the two studies is the designation study, I think, would like to rely on the RPC mapping and get themselves out of the mapping business. So like it would be, how the municipality defines their village area and in our regional plan, as opposed to just the part of your village that maybe has a designation now. Does that make sense?
Sort of, yeah, I think so. So will the commission have to sign off on that, on when all those when you guys come up with whatever those definitions are and where those lines are going to go? Is that something the commission signs off on as part of the ECOS plan? And
right, yeah, that's why Taylor said that was one of the things we're expecting. If statute does change, that there will be a pretty quick demand, or at least asks, to update the map to reflect those new definitions. And and hopefully there's new benefits and things that come with it, right? Designations or exemptions or investments. But I do think, and this is mostly Joe from like Chris Cochran, trying to get more, I think being a little bit more realistic about these areas and not so tight.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah. All right, sorry, that was just a lot of stuff I just threw at you, and thank you for your patience.
Well, thank
Any
you.
other feedback?
Again, I'm just looking for the summary. We have 4 studies. The first one, remind me, the Act 250. Yep. And then the second one about designation.
Right.
And then the third one about delegation.
You got it.
And the fourth one, how would you just summarize what we were just
That's
looking
the
at?
future land use area maps.
Bring your Sharpie. Okay.
Well, and to be honest, the conversation amongst the RPCs has not been bring your Sharpie, Chris. It's been we've pretty much have already mapped these areas.
Yeah.
We're changing the name and maybe tightening up. Maybe you got to either shrink or expand your area a little bit to be consistent with the criteria, but these aren't new concepts in any of the regions, really.
No, we've all had our own versions at hopefully the city level and
exactly.
Here at the county level. So we're just trying to get all on the same page with the nomenclature and everything.
Exactly.
Super. And thank you for trying to consolidate things into 6 or 7 categories. I'm sure it's
well, we're trying. I think I don't know, there were probably 30 different ones across the RPCs. So
all right, are we ready to move on?
Yep.
So you're going to be going around to your annual tour of the select boards and city councils.
Yeah, so just a heads up, I've done my first couple. Thank you, Mayor, a lot for your hospitality Monday night. And I think I have all of them scheduled. I will endeavor to copy you. Benjamin, I don't think I have Westford scheduled. I think that's the only one No, I do. I do have it.
Do you know when that is?
I do. And that's what I was just about to say. Is I will I have appointments on my calendar for each of those. I will add you to my appointments, so just heads up. And it may be just like the week before the meeting or something, but I'll try to go through my calendar in the next week or so and add you to those appointments, so you're very well aware of when I'm going to be at your town select board or city council. And I'll also try to add the actual report that I've provided to the town, so you can see that in advance as well. That was my update there. And then the B item was you see the question mark there. I think as staff was kind of working with the executive committee to put this agenda together, we kind of realized we have typically done trainings for new board members September, October, November, before those meetings. It didn't feel like we had a lot of new board members this summer. And I'm kind of looking around, but Joe, I guess you're new, but you know us very well. And Austin as well. Do folks feel like there's a topic or two that we should do a training on next month or November? We're open to it, but would like a little direction or feedback on what would be most helpful to you. Silence is going to make me think you're good.
Good.
Well, certainly speak up, and this is your opportunity. I know that I found the board trainings invaluable when I first joined because of just the acronym onslaught between the UPWP, the ECOS plan, and et cetera, and understanding our role in both the transportation side and the planning side, and then now the water quality side, and now both the economic development side, and now these 4 studies that are going to be, I think, monopolizing a lot of our time as well. So if there is something that you're unsure of, or you need more education on, we'd spend a half hour before the meeting, from say 5:30 to 6 o'clock, and we'd get that topic covered. We wouldn't cover all the topics, but we would certainly understand our role and responsibilities, and creating work plans, and showing that they were financially constrained for the upcoming 5 years, 6 years that we were required to do. So if anyone feels, please speak up. Otherwise, I'm going to go by Charlie's sense that we're in pretty good shape.
Did I see Benjamin raise a hand? Yeah.
Yeah, just a point of information. In Westford, our town administrator, who was also for many years the town clerk, then town administrator for many, many years, Nanette Rogers, just a formidable individual, has been plucked to another town in Chittenden County to become their administrator. So if there's any, there may be some unevenness. There is supposed to be somebody monitoring the email box and the like, but if you have any questions about that, if I can help facilitate setting the date for your visit, please let me know.
Yeah, Benjamin, thank you. I did get it scheduled with her. Yeah.
Oh, you did? Okay.
Yeah. We were very aware of when she was leaving so that we could, take advantage of her while she was there.
Right.
Yeah, she's the town
Well
clerk
done.
of Essex Town now. Town clerk of
Yeah.
Essex Town, where she moved to.
So again, I'm going to leave space for anyone who feels board training topic. If not, I think we at the executive committee might talk about it when we meet in October in the first week, and see if we can find any holes that need to be filled. But in the meantime, bubble up or email Charlie or myself, and we can take it from there. Anything else, Charlie?
Nothing else from me. No, thank you.
Okay, so item 12 is all the committee and liaison activities and reports that I would hope you would swat up on if you feel so inclined. They're at the end of your packet, and cover all of our work over August and September so far. So we're looking forward to our next meeting on October 18th, and we will ask for a motion to adjourn. I'll see Mike O'Brien.
I move we adjourn.
Okay.
Bart, I'll second it.
I second.
Thank you, Benjamin. Thank you, Bart. And thank you for waving Mike and getting us all awake for the exiting.
Yeah,
So,
I forgot to unmute myself.
any further discussion? Otherwise, all those in favor, please say aye. Raise your hand.
Aye.
Aye.
Hit your leave key if you object or abstain.